Internal family systems.
If this stiffness in your neck had a name, what would this person's name be? I remember a bulimic client started noticing that she has a bulimic part. It's a vulnerable story, but it's a real story. I can't believe my girl is talking to another guy. I got so jealous. I lie down, kind of like Shavasana. I was like, where's the jealous part? Real story. A human-sized nail just nailing me to the ground. And I had this feeling of my dad.
Hey guys, welcome to Soul to Soul. My guest today is Lawrence J. Lawrence J, yogi since 2007. Before it was even cool, he taught yoga in best studios in Moscow, Canada, Hong Kong, and now Bali. He has great energy, he's very spiritually connected. Today we're going to talk about his newest passion, which is called Internal Family System, psychotherapy method that allows you to understand your traumas, connect with them, and heal them by yourself at home. He gives very practical examples today, and you can just sit down, do them, follow the conversation, and it gives you great benefit. Please enjoy my conversation with Lawrence J. Internal family systems.
Yeah.
So as far as I understand them, he teaches that outside of your external family, there's internal family within you.
Kind of.
Okay, tell
I
me
had this
more.
conversation yesterday with a couple of people, and that seems to be for somebody who has very little experience with IFS.
Like me.
Yeah, like the kind of entry in terms of, but that's not really what it is. And at the same time, there's aspects of it. So as I understand, Richard Schwartz, who created the system, initially came through being a family therapist. And by being a family therapist and studying family therapy, the idea is that the members of your family, if you rearrange the relationships within the family, it's going to rearrange the way that a human behaves, reacts, and their life, right? Like from a therapeutic standpoint. He realized by doing this kind of work that doesn't work. That's
Really?
not true. Yeah. So then he started having conversations with, specifically I remember, a bulimic client, and started noticing that she has a bulimic part.
A bulimic part of her.
Yeah, a bulimic part. So that's in reference to, there's a part of her that's bulimic. There's a part of her as opposed to her. And this is where we can, like, I'm already in the space of explaining this concept to you. In life, we are conditioned on a mass level of like, here is a person, here's Lawrence, for example. He is angry. Lawrence is angry. Or Lawrence is selfish. Or Lawrence is excited, right? So we look at it from a perspective of, this is what Richard Schwartz uses this term, and I think it's fascinating. He says, we have this idea that we are mono-minded, that we have one mind. So your identity is your mind, as opposed to a multiplicity of minds. So in his work with this bulimic client, he was like, oh, she has a bulimic part. That's a part of her, but that's not the only part of her. And he started talking to this part and being like, yo, bulimic part, and, you know, together with the client, like having conversations, kind of like constellation work. We got to get rid of you. So like anyone who is facing judgment and annihilation, they hold on for dear life. So what he would realize in the session is the bulimic part would maybe like be eased or even agree to going away, like being peer pressured. But then the client would come back and she was in an even worse state. So he was like, wait a second, this isn't working. And then through the process of working with the clients that were bulimic and had eating disorders in general, he started realizing that just like anybody, they want to be acknowledged and appreciated. And these parts, so the bulimic part was protecting the client from exposing a trauma.
Interesting.
Yeah. So by being the protection mechanism of the trauma, the bulimia had a purpose. It had a reason for existing. And when you start talking to it with respect and with compassion and curiosity, what occurs is the bulimia starts to say to you, the part starts to say, I don't want to be doing this, but this is all I know how to do. And it starts to expose the trauma that it's actually protecting through conversation. And there's different like prompts.
For example?
You can, first of all, show gratitude to that part, like from a perspective of, thank you for doing this, because there was this other part that if it was exposed, it would have been much more dangerous. But you might also ask the part, hey, how old are you?
To the bulimic part.
To the bulimic part, or to any part. It could be like
I'm excited for bulimic part. Because that's the weirdest example you can find.
Well, okay, so this is the part, this is what's so cool about what's happening in this conversation, and this is what makes the work so fascinating to me, and I think what makes it effective is that what we've just done between you and I is we've established that this bulimic part is separate from the self.
Yeah.
So now you're having a conversation with this other thing that's independent of you. Now, once you're looking at something as independent, it's much easier to have compassion and curiosity for it.
Okay.
And once you have compassion and curiosity for these parts, or for this specific part, your favorite bulimic part, so it's the only part you know, but what happens is you start to be able to see it. You build a relationship with it. And as you build a relationship with it, it can be reassigned based on its own will, because maybe it doesn't want to be the bulimic part. Maybe it's all it knows.
But it's so weird. What does the client feels? Like if somebody would talk to me as let's say I have extra weight and somebody's like, let's talk to Fat Anatoly. So Fat Anatoly, how are you? I'll be like, what are we talking about?
I love your perspective, because the entryway for you would be different. A way that I might work with a client, because what I do it in the context of myself, my own personal self-work, which is where it really came in and became interesting. But I also work with clients on in a craniosacral kind of experience, where first what I do is I develop rapport with them. So if I'm going to place my hands on somebody and do a cranial hold, for example, or if I'm going to teach a yoga class, or if I'm even going to have a conversation with you that's going to be effective, the most important thing is that we have rapport, which means we both feel safe. So if you're my client, I want you to feel safe, right? Once I understand what's going on in your life because you feel safe, you trust me, I could ask you, let's tune into your body. Let's tune into your field. Let's tune into what's going on with you. So I might say something like, how does your body feel right now? And you might be like, okay, if we want to go back to this like fat part or politically correct overweight part.
You can call my part fat.
Okay, cool. Why not? Because it becomes like a character, like a personality, right? So this fat part of you, how do you know that this fat part exists?
That's a great question. That was my next question. Like, how do you know what are those parts?
Well, that's what I would ask you. Like, you would say, you're the one who brought up that this fat part is a part, right? That it has a life, whatever that even means.
Sure.
Right? So I would say to you, how do you know that it exists? And that answer might be, you might feel it physically or sensually. You might feel like,
I look in the mirror and I'm like, a little fat today.
but you're not in the context of a session looking in a mirror. So how do you know? So that might be a thought. Like the way that you expressed that just now was, I look in the mirror. So it's a memory. So that's a stream of thought consciousness. So you might say, oh, Ed, there's a voice that reminds me of it. Then we actually start pinpointing the part. And then we can start talking to the part. Or not even talking to the part initially. Like I said, observe it from a perspective of compassion and curiosity. So the fat part, like you just explained it, from a context of looking in the mirror, maybe is sarcastic from what I heard, or I'm just like adding to it. Like you might be able to, if this doesn't resonate with you, I would say, just correct me, right? And I'd be like, it sounds critical of you, but maybe not. So when you look at this part with compassion and curiosity, you might look at it from a perspective of a character. You might look at it from a perspective of like, okay, so this voice, if it had a posture, what would that posture look like? So you're actually creating a sense of this part. And then once you create a sense of it, once again, it's another added detachment from it being the mono-minded of I'm a fat person, or I'm a bulimic person, or I'm an insecure person, or I'm an anxious person, to there's this part that plays out these things. And sometimes where myself in IFS, Richard Schwartz calls it self-energy, isn't in the driver's seat, this part might pretend to be me and show up in the world as me.
How do you know that's part of good or bad? Because part of me thinks like if I start to resolve parts of me, then what's left, I guess.
It's really beautiful. I really love that you ask these questions because I could see how people maybe that come from like various traditions might have issue with it, because then it leaves you with emptiness, right?
I'm happy to get my fat Anatoly go.
Right, but then
Well,
what's left if there's no? But like from a Buddhist,
But I don't want to be a bulimic Anatoly.
So from a Buddhist perspective, the emptiness and having nothing left would be great. Like, oh my God, right?
Yeah.
Like, look, I'm so neutral in that sense. I don't have reactions, negative or positive. The way that you initially phrased it was, how do I know if it's good or bad?
Yeah.
There is no good or bad. I mean, we know that, right? You live in Bali. You know that there's no such thing as good or bad.
Yeah.
But what there is the meaning that we place on things. So the meaning that you place on the fat or the meaning that you place on the bulimic becomes the burden that you place on the part, which is also the burden that you place on your life. You're not necessarily trying to get rid of the bulimic part or trying to get rid of the fat part. Are you guys following? Yeah? What you're trying to do is build a relationship with those parts, make those parts feel safe, seen, acknowledged, appreciated, so that the burden can be lifted. Then the parts that we're now referring to and referencing as fat or bulimic or anxious or shy or whatever, without the burden, they're free to become whatever they want to be. They were burdened with this application or this job.
But I think the hard part is to find where a burden is. Because like what's troubling me? Where is it burden? What am I carrying? Might be, to me, that sounds way harder than even start talking to it. Because once you have awareness that, okay, I feel that it's an issue that I think I'm fat when other people say I'm not fat, for example. So there's some burden I'm carrying around that. But often there are something that you just feel uncomfortable. You feel something is wrong, but you don't know what the burden is. Like, what am I carrying? What's the problem?
That's perfect. So that would be a really beautiful way to start a session. You would say, how do you know something's burdening you? Let's say it's a physical ailment. And so it could be something like a stiff neck, or it can be my stomach is in knots, whatever, right? Then you start to take a look at that. And then you start from there. So we started from a place of like identification as fat or as bulimic. So it already has like a story attached to it. But maybe it's just a feeling. So the more nuanced you get about this, the more you can have conversations with the most nuanced sensations. Like, oh, I feel my psoas is starting to grip, which is a muscle that connects from the thigh to the lumbar. Whatever. I'm just like, I'm throwing out something. Let's do something. Let's just experiment.
Like,
I bit my inner lip, or I bit my inner cheek. You know when that happens, when you're like eating too much of something and you're, and now it's like hurting. That's now burdening me, right? So let's just like take a moment and tune into that physical experience. Like, what does that feel like? And then we look at it from a perspective of compassion and curiosity. So what is that feeling, that sensation, if you were to approach it or observe it with compassion and curiosity, what would come out of that? Let's go back to the moment. I want to kind of like circle back and then come back to this. Let's go back to the family question, right? The idea about internal family studies is he started out with like family therapy. Like, okay, if the father or the mother or the brother or the sister behave differently, maybe this life would end up differently. Now we take that into the inner world, right? So you might have something on a really simplistic perspective. You might say something like, you have your inner father, you have your inner child, you have your inner mother, you have your, all real, and there are those parts probably too. But I don't think that that's what IFS is saying, although it might. I'm not the person to ask, and I don't think it matters. It's kind of an art form in that sense that like every practitioner might approach it in their own way. It's the family of relationships between these conflicting parts. Yeah. So let's just say, for the context of this conversation, the bulimic part and the fat part are in conflict with each other. So you literally would have, I mean, that would actually make sense, right? Where the bulimic part would be like, I'm trying to protect you. What does bulimic people do? They vomit, right?
Yeah.
Right? So the bulimic person might vomit, but the fat part might be the one that's binging, and they might be in war with each other. If self energy, which means like this part of ourselves that's able to observe, were to say, hey, bulimic part, and hey, fat part, let's sit at a table together and let's see if we can work together. So this internal family might start working together, and they might actually be able to work towards letting go of both and finding some equal ground. And they might actually find something that's quite beneficial for them, because they're obviously very strong, or like, so to speak, good at what they do. Maybe if they did something else, they would be just as successful, but maybe that would be positive, or we can use the word healthy.
Yeah, I have lots of questions.
Okay, good.
So the tuning in part for us in Bali, it's sort of kind of a little bit of common sense, because people talk about tuning in all the time.
Totally.
People who are listening, who might have like lots of people in US, let's say, are overweight. That's a common problem. Tuning into yourself and finding this, speaking to your body, it's already halfway there, but it's very hard to do. So how would somebody who is listening right now and might want to talk to, let's say, their overweight self, how do they tune into their body and just start to have this conversation?
So
what are the methods?
I spent a lot of time studying meditation, and yoga is a form of meditation in a sense. In meditation, the way I was always trained think nothing or observe. And what both of those do is, like, by observing, you get to experience what's happening, whether it's thoughts or feelings or emotions in your body. From my teachings, like where I studied, usually it stopped at just observe, and by observing, things will go away. This practice is more about stepping in. So observe first and then step in. So for somebody who's not familiar with just like being present,
Yeah.
you might just want to get them to pause, breathe, and feel. So like presence, for somebody who doesn't have a relationship with that as a practice, they just need to be guided. So I would say to yourself or to somebody else, take a deep breath in. Exhale, breath out. Sit with a posture that has you sitting up tall, right? Relax. Soften, and I would say something like the back of your neck. So now they're like consciously, they're doing things.
So you're guiding them.
You're guiding them. And as they're doing this, they're becoming more safe. This is where, okay, one thing that I want to share that you haven't asked this question, but why this became so fascinating to me is because simultaneously as a yoga teacher / somebody who's been working with craniosacral work, I know that a human being in general is going to be in a space of healing, whether it's physical, emotional, or psychological. They're making that available to themselves if they're in a parasympathetic state, which means their nervous system feels safe. We don't normally live that. Like, especially this person that might be overweight. Likely they're overweight because they're using food to numb themselves or occupy themselves from dealing with maybe emotions or stress or what have you. So they're not feeling safe. They're feeling rushed. They're feeling overwhelmed. Once we create a parasympathetic space for them, their parts, they actually become present, but also they become susceptible to any kind of healing. Like whether it's like my shoulder hurts or my heart hurts or I can't make a decision, when you have a little bit of space, you get the opportunity to actually see things with perspective. Perspective creates an opportunity for somebody to relax into being able to recognize, oh, I have a feeling in my neck. My neck is stiff. Okay, let's start there. If you're, and I guess it's like trusting the practitioner and then eventually trusting yourself, because you can self do this work on yourself. But I guess the point is, like, for somebody who's tense and stressed and watching television all the time, to get their attention enough to to be in this space might be challenging. But once they feel safe, they buy in. And once they buy in, oh, like, let's just play this thought game. We can start like that. Let's just play this thought exercise. If this stiffness in your neck had a name, what would this person's name be? And if they had the name that was Rick, no, I know you're going to go with that at some point and make a joke about Rick, but what does Rick look like? What is he wearing? What's his posture? How old does he look? From a perspective of compassion and curiosity.
Interesting.
Yeah. Then we can start actually talking to Rick, which might be more effective than fat part, bulimic part. But
okay. So what would you say to Rick in this case? How would we talk to Rick?
You initially create a perspective of Rick, which initiated as a stiffness in the neck, by just observing him with compassion and curiosity. And I think of like observing a child that's like trying to figure out a problem. It's like he's doing everything he can, but it's not happening. So I see, for example, I'm making this up. Like, we can do a session on you right now, or I can do an internal session on myself. But back to Rick for a moment, it's like, oh, I see he really wants to win this game. I feel for him. That's compassion, right? And curiosity, it's like, why does he really want to win this game? So curiosity or fascination with comes into it. And you're like, oh, I get it. Or at least I feel it. Maybe I don't get it. And then you give Rick a voice. And this is the part that's really interesting. It's like you'll say, hey, Rick, which started as a stiffness in the neck, that really wants to win this game. Do you have anything to tell me? Like, why are you here in the form of a stiffness in the neck? Like, why is this something that you've chosen to do? And he might give you information or he might not. And if he gives you information, you're like, oh my God, thank you so much. I understand you. Thank you so much for your service. You have created this stiffness in my neck because every time when I looked to the left side, I saw something that was traumatic. So this helped me refrain from that. And then I started doing the work that I was supposed to do. I'm making this up completely, but it might resonate with somebody. Maybe. And then you might ask Rick's age. And you might say something like, Rick, can you please tell me your age? And once he's been like appreciated and acknowledged, he might feel more trusting to actually answer that question. And you might say something, and I might say something to the client like, don't try to make sense of the age. Just tell Rick to give you a number. And usually that age is like somewhere in like the first few years of life, anywhere from 0 to 12 years old, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? It might be 2 or 3. Who knows? It depends on the client and their access. And then you would say, hey, Rick, that's cool that you're 6 years old. I'm going to tell you my age now. And you tell the client to tell that Rick part that just wants to do well, that initiated from the neck stiffness. I'm 44. And something happens to Rick, usually, when the 6-year-old finds out that he's having a conversation with the 44-year-old. There's like, oh, this stiffness isn't so daunting. It's just a 6-year-old reaction to something. And then what occurs is Rick will shift or grow or change.
Wow.
A lot of times, is especially if he's starting to trust. But likely, this 6-year-old, that is Rick, didn't have access to process these feelings, emotions, so it locked into a behavior at 6 years old that we call a stiffness in the neck, that we call an injury from sports. But all in all, it was this unconscious, like gripping onto, I'm not going to look left because I might see something that created trauma in me.
That is crazy. And does Rick needs 1 session, 2? ungrip? What happens is when you work with Rick, you talk to Rick, do the clients see at the same session that Rick goes away and then you don't have stiffness?
So what I would say to my clients, which is based on like me paying attention to what Richard Schwartz has done or other IFS stuff that I've like taken in, is here's some homework for you, like to the client. I mean, Rick might not be the only thing. Rick might be depends on how long the session is and where you go with it. It might be it might be a doorway to something even deeper, likely, right? And then there are other parts that are revealed. But let's answer your question. I might say to the client, so your homework for the next week or for the next month is to just check in with Rick. Likely what happens with like Rick, right? Or like the stiffness in the neck based on the trauma is it's linked to a memory. So let's go back to this trauma. I didn't want to look here because if I looked here, I would have seen something that was like so horrific. But all of a sudden by befriending Rick, you have access to that memory that you didn't want to see that before maybe traumatically was blocked out. So this is where you have to be careful because you might be going into places that are like super deep in terms of trauma. You might ask Rick, hey, so Rick becomes a 6-year-old. So you might tell the client, just check in with your 6-year-old. And part of the thing is like, hey, Rick, 6-year-old Ricky, you've been spending all this time creating stiffness and tension in the left part of the neck. What would you rather be doing? Would you rather be doing something else than like being like face control for turning left with my eyes or with my head? And Rick might say, fuck yeah, I want to fly, or I want to take a space shuttle into space or whatever, right? Like in the internal world, there are no limits. It's very psychedelic in that sense or dreamlike. Like you can go anywhere with it. Rick might be you just checking in with your 6-year-old that just by getting to know Rick, you start to realize so many things about what the 6-year-old needs and also who Rick was protecting. Like the 6-year-old very likely is protecting maybe a younger version of yourself, and then you start to go into relationship with the 4-year-old or maybe in a part of yourself that like doesn't have an age in utero or whatever. Like we don't know because as far as I know, we don't have conscious memory of what happens for the first 6-7 years of our life according to science or whatever, right? So there's a trust mechanism here of these memories or these thoughts will guide us into things that will make sense. And in my experience, they do have profound connections that are made. And in the spaces where it feels like I'm just making it up, it's still profound, like it's still helpful. If you listen to like an interview with Richard Schwartz, the founder again, Dr. Richard Schwartz, he'll be like, that is not imagination. He's like, that's a world that is real. And these parts have a life and they have a body. And if we don't connect with them, they're still living their lives. So the stiffness in your neck is still stiffening until it breaks, until some other part,
So you used that on yourself. What are some of the things that you were able to solve for yourself using that?
Okay. I've only told this story. It's a vulnerable story, but it's a real story. I'll share it with you. I recently did this speaking engagement, and it was a container of various speakers. And in this container of various speakers, like we all trained together and prepared our talk together. It's called FabX. And in this container, one of the speakers and I, in the 11th hour, like right before like the few days before we spoke, we were rehearsing together, and like an intimate connection was created. We spent some time together and I felt bonded with her. And then the night of the talk, I felt so calm and so at ease, and I was taking care of everybody, all the speakers, and like just like really there for everybody, and even the audience as they came, I was greeting everybody and just like felt so good. But in the huddle right before we spoke, there was this guy that was added into our kind of like team that wasn't there before. He wasn't a speaker, he was the musician that played the interstitial music. And he is just so suave and cool. I think he's an Australian guy. He was just so talented musically, so good. And I saw the girl connect with him. And I don't know if it's real or not, but I got jealous and I closed down right before we went on stage, I was like I went to like first love, like I can't believe my girl is talking to another guy. Like I got so jealous. And as the huddle ended and we were all preparing to speak, one of the other speakers came up to me. She was like, "Can you help me? I need something." And I was like, "Yeah, no problem." She's like, "You're not present right now. What's up?" And I'm like, "I just got really nervous." And she's like, "Can I help you with anything?" "About what?" And I didn't want to talk about it because I knew that talking about it would just loop me in it. And then I look up and I see the girl and the guy go to the bathroom together. And I'm like, I just need a moment. And in the green room, I lie down, kind of like Shavasana, and I just went in and I was like, where's the jealous part? Real story.
Yeah.
And I felt adrenaline in my legs. And I was like, there's the jealous part, adrenaline in my legs. So I started conversing with it, and I was like, thank you so much. Like, I'm perceiving a threat in my body. I appreciate you taking care of me. And it eased. The adrenaline went away. Like the jealousy started to ease. And then I felt, and I'm telling a shorter version of it, but it all happened within like 5 to 10 minutes anyways. I felt a strain in my thigh, and I went to that, and with compassion and curiosity, what did it look like? And it just looked internally like a big nail, like a human-sized nail, like just nailing me to the ground. And I was like, what is that? And I had this feeling of my dad, and my dad not taking care of me, or like if I had like exciting ideas, holding me back, not letting me have excitement for it. It felt like my father energy. And in this internal space, I like grabbed the nail, I lifted it, the tension went away, and I literally got up and it was gone. Like I saw the musician dude that's just like so amazing. Like he's just a, like creative guy. I was like, oh, he's so wonderful. I was able to be ready for the girl who I had the connection with, like just so I can be like, okay, you're ready to go. Let's do this. You're going to be amazing. Sat down, watched her talk. I think I spoke like a little bit after that, but I was a completely different person than the calm guy that was floating through, helping everybody. It kind of felt like a Mamba, like very Kobe Bryant. Like I was just like, boom, I was set up. And that was something that I did in real time. And I didn't have those tools. Like, imagine like I had to live the next hour or 40 minutes before my performance in like jealousy and like in lack. And I literally connected that moment back to my father. That's inner child stuff. Like an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old. So yeah.
So how did the story end? Are you still in connection with the girl, or did she run away with the musician?
Dude, I don't know. That mini relationship, if we could even call it that, was a really beautiful 4-day arc that carried both of us through that experience. Like it was nice to have somebody by my side, and it was nice to be able to take care of somebody through somewhat of an intense experience of like just to give you some reference to that, we told our story, our life story, and it was quite vulnerable, I think, for both of us and for everybody involved. It wasn't just me and her, but like to have somebody that was like a super connection there was sweet. And then it dissolved very fast. She flew away and I flew away, and we're not in contact anymore.
All right. Beautiful story. That's actually very good. It puts it in perspective, because sometimes you're getting tools and you're like, I don't know how to use it. But in your case, there was a real threat that if you would not solve, could become a trauma for longer.
True. I don't know how real the threat was. And like, even if they did have like...
But it's your internal threat.
Internal, it was real. Like I was like, whoa, I had adrenaline flowing through my body. That was real.
Yeah.
And it was just based on the talk that I did also. It was just very relevant. It was a beautiful experience to have, and one that you don't choose to ever have, but like in hindsight, I'm glad it happened.
So let's get there. Let's get to a talk. So you gave a talk about your life. If you look back to a talk and like summarize some of the most important lessons you learned, maybe one or two, what would you say they are?
I thought about this on the way here in reference to what you're saying. The last time we spoke in April, you asked me about my life, like how I grew up and stuff like that. And I always consider the fact that like I grew up upper middle class in the suburbs, that my life was great. Like I felt guilty and shameful to say that like that I wasn't happy or my upbringing wasn't perfect. And it wasn't until like I sat down and talked to you where you were asking me like, what was your life like? And I was like, the only time I really remember being happy was when I was playing sports with my friends. But at home, like it didn't feel like all butterflies and stuff like that. And I think this talk gave me an opportunity to really refine that initial conversation that I had with you, which was quite, I mean, cathartic in the sense that it opened that up for me. Like I wasn't aware that like my childhood it was experienced by me as dark. It wasn't that dark, but like I experienced it as dark, and I got to unpack that, and I got to look at that from a storytelling angle, which was also quite therapeutic. So your question was one or two things. Sorry.
So you spoke about your life story. You prepared a speech, so
Yeah.
I assume there was some realizations happening. So what were some of the kind of lessons from your life that you drew?
This idea that if I proved myself, I would receive love. If I was good enough initially for my parents, or if I really get into it, like for my perspective of what I had to be for my parents, then I would receive respect, and I would feel safe, and I would receive love. And yet that never really happened. Like those things being good enough or proving myself never accessed me what I was looking for. So I just became bigger. I became maybe louder. I became maybe more animated. It's just a realization that I didn't need to do that. Like I just needed to feel safe within me. And that wasn't accessible. Like my parents were never ever going to be the ones that gave me approval to the point where like now life was amazing, nor would anybody else. It's all within me. And the IFS stuff that we're talking about, I mean, we're talking about it in reference to IFS, which is a brand, which is a system, you know, but really what it is, it's just access to my own inner world. And it gave me permission and freedom to be able to understand that I can take care of myself. Sometimes taking care of myself means that if I have an insecurity, I can dissolve it through having internal conversations. Sometimes if I have an insecurity, hopefully it'll drive me in the direction of overcoming it.
Interesting. The other thing that you put in the questionnaire, taking a little sideways right, I guess, was that you had the profound psilocybin experience since we last spoke. How did that affect your life, and what was it?
I haven't brought this up in this conversation, but it's all very interrelated. Initially, part of my talk talks about this inner child work that I did with a friend of mine. She's a yoga teacher, and she does inner child work. And I did this work with her that introduced me to my inner child. And I mean, what I mean by introduce me to my inner child, that was the exercises that we did. We would like write letters to my inner child, or she would be like, and look at pictures of my 4-year-old version of me, you know, and I'd be like, Mom, send me some 4-year-old pictures. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, interesting. Like really paying attention and being present with like the facial expressions or what he was doing. Like there's one picture of me at 4 years old eating McDonald's, you know, it's like food going in my mouth. My relationship to food came up to, right? Like all that kind of stuff. So I did that work with her, and I didn't really think much of it. Like the 4 sessions went by and months went by, and I was like, okay, that was an experience, no big deal. But when I did this psilocybin experience with somebody that we both know who guided it, there was a moment in the psilocybin session, in the journey, where it was towards the end, and the girl beside me, because it was a group, was yelling, screaming. It was terrifying to hear the demons that were coming out of this extremely beautiful human. We were all blindfolded, but I knew who was beside me, and the shrieks were terrifying, like horror movie terrifying. And there was a moment that happened in this ceremony where I kind of just, because I was right beside her, I just kind of like rolled over. And as I rolled over, I grasped, like held on, hugged, and I just said to my inner child, organically, randomly, it's okay. We're going to be okay. And that was a big moment in terms of like that initial amount of work that we did, and just like this organic moment, this natural moment of me saying to myself, but to a different part of myself, it was access to like, oh my God, this is scary to a part of me. This is before I knew about IFS. And I was just like, it's okay. We're going to be okay. Knowing that whatever this person went through or is going through right now, and we're okay. And we're going to be okay. And don't worry, that's not what's going on with you. That taught me that this internal child, if I started giving him attention and had conversations with him and gave him space and told him that he's okay, he'll talk back to me, and he'll talk back to me in a way that's quite intelligent. Like, he has insights and he's inspiring and he can guide me in ways that I didn't know. It really had me like, I always say this, when I see Bali children, not Balinese children, but I see like, I mean, Balinese children too in a way, but what I have access to expat kids, and I'll have conversations with them, and I'm like, holy cow, these kids are bright. Like, they're turned on, they're sharp. And I'm like, I don't remember myself, or I don't know myself as when I was a child being that sharp, that smart. And once I started having these internal conversations with my like 4-year-old version, I'd be like, oh, I was smart. I just didn't have the platform. Like, it wasn't developed. The people around me weren't like, what do you think? Oh my God, that's a great idea. Let's try that. Wow. Like, I didn't have that.
Same, yeah. But once I look at my kids, I'm like, wow. I hope I was like that, but by no means I believe that's true. But it could be true. It just, yeah, I didn't have an opportunity to be that. So internally, I might have been as bright like as my son is, but because nobody would treat me seriously, I would usually just not talk or not say my opinion when I was 4.
Yeah. So that psilocybin ceremony, journey, whatever you want to call it, it kind of opened up this relationship with my internal child self in a whole new way. The seed was planted months before that, and then I came across IFS right after that. Like, it's almost like the universe was like, okay, now you're ready for this piece. And I listened to a podcast, and I was like, where a session was facilitated, and I was like, oh my God, it gave me free reign. It was like, I'm going inside now. And it got me excited for the next psilocybin journey, because all of a sudden next time I was like, whereas previously I might be scared to like go into a psychedelic realm and like, I hope I'm taken care of. I hope it's safe, set and setting. I hope nothing like traumatic comes up. Oh my God, like, like none of that. It was more like, I got the tools now. Let's go. Like, all of the darkness, I know how to deal with you. I'm just going to love you. I'm just going to be excited about you. I'm just going to be appreciative and grateful for you. And let's see what comes up.
Well, that's a very good way to look at it. Because there are so many people, including me, who is like, once you get darkness, you just get scared. Instead of just accepting it and saying, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. This is good. It's a healing procedure. Let's just connect with it, feel it, and just be grateful for it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is something that I didn't put on the like questionnaire thing that you asked me, but we spoke a little bit about it before I went away. It brings up for me this experience that I just did in Canada a few weeks ago called the Hoffman process.
Okay.
And the Hoffman process, I was drawn to it for various reasons, but also just because it was dealing with, it's a 7-day retreat where it's completely like no contact with the outside world. You're with 32 people in a closed space going through this process that takes you through the patterns that have been accumulated from like 0 to 6 or even beyond that from your parents. And the theory behind it is that all of our behaviors, all of our feelings, all of our everything are based on patterns that we got from our parents called the negative love syndrome, which means that like as a child, because we're experiencing ourselves as the extension of our mother and our father, and that is the only place where we get love from, we're always looking to appease them by either repeating their behavior through like imitating their behaviors to get approval. Like, oh my God, look at him. He does the same thing as me. I love him so much. Or if that doesn't get the love that we were looking for, just to get their attention, because attention is better than nothing.
Yeah.
So we do the opposite. So it really has me like going through that process really had me like dive deeper into a lot of the just the inner child stuff that already came up through IFS.
All right. What was the name of the podcast about IFS that you mentioned?
The amount of contact in IFS is endless. But the one that really that shifted things for me that I found, it was just random. Aubrey Marcus interviewed Richard Schwartz not too long ago. And then after that, I started like really digging away. And Timothy Ferriss has one with him, and I think Aubrey Marcus has another one with him. Those were the three that kind of opened the door, and then I just went through all the books and courses, and there's like so much content on IFS all over the place.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
A few more questions. I'm starting to really be passionate about the ice baths and looking more and more into that. You seems to be doing them quite consistently for a while now. I saw you were, I think, doing it in Canada. If I'm correct, you're doing it here in Bali. What's your relationship to that? Why do you do them?
I'm glad you're asking, because it's like it's been renewed in my life. I bought a few months ago a chest freezer, so I have one at home, right? And I take it for granted, I'd say. But then I went away, and when I went away, I got to dip my toe into what's happening in North America. We have a different spa culture here in Bali. And then like the spa culture that I experienced before I lived in Bali was in Russia, which they have the banya culture. But it's really interesting to step into North America, because North America doesn't have culture except for popular culture. I mean, and I don't mean to upset anybody, but like,
it's okay.
In terms of, I don't think I'm going to upset you, but you know what I'm talking about. Like, there is a culture, whatever, but like, I'm talking about like the surface culture, the mainstream culture that runs the world, basically, in terms of popular culture. Here, it kind of feels integrated into our lives and quite natural, but they're like, you got to go into a room that doesn't have like bamboo, you know, and you have to like do yoga, and like it's like industrialized, and at the same time you close your eyes and you're having this internal experience. So there's this place in Toronto called the Other Ship.
Good name.
It's a good name. It's in Yorkville, which is like the fancy part of town, and then they have another one on Adelaide, which is also like banker, like they know what they're doing, right? So I went randomly the last day that I was in Toronto before I flew, or the day that I flew. And the experience is you go into a sauna, so kind of like a Russian banya. You spend some time there. You have like a Canadian that's like, hurrah, hurrah, you know, like super smiley, like so excited. Oh my, what's up, guys? Very much like who I am all the time, but even more so.
Yeah.
Without the edge. And then half the group, they like put you up in teams. It's very like Squid Games. It's not really, but there's aspects of it. And then they're like, okay, we're going to go to the ice plunge. And it's a class. This is where it's fascinating, because you and I will go to Astana, or we'll go to whatever Body Factory, like the places here. There's no place in Ubud. Startup, if you want to do a business, that's something we can do. Yeah. But you kind of just like lounge and enjoy the sunset, and I'll go into the cold plunge, I'll go into the sauna. Like, that's the experience here. But they commercialized it into like 60 to 75 minute experiences. So like I got up at 7 a.m. and I go into the sauna, and then hurrah person comes, and she like creates teams, and we go into the cold plunge, and I went with a buddy of mine. So like we got to like cheer each other on. You can also go solo mission, right? And my poor friend is like a little bit more sensitive than I am. I'm like, zen. I get in there and I'm like having the conversations with my inner parts. And he's like, but regardless, I go into like the thing and it's like a minute and then she has us doing movement and breathing and then back into the sauna. And then this was like this is an especially more like cold focused. I think like usually they only go into the cold once, but I went to like the hard one first. And then we go back in and we go in 30 seconds in, 30 seconds out 3 times, which was the first time I'd ever experienced that, as much experience as I have with the cold plunge. And now I do it all the time. And anyhow, I just got revigorated with that experience because I'm just fascinated how like this thing that we experience if we want to in Bali on a regular basis, or at least I do with my cold plunge, whatever, my freezer chest, they experience it as like a package deal where somebody's facilitating it's like a yoga class, but it's not yoga anymore. It's like sauna, meditate a little bit, breathe a little bit, do some like, exercises, which is the shit that I do in my classes. And I don't mean to call it shit. I'm just kind of like being cool. And then you go into the cold plunge and, and you have that moment where you're like cheering people on. You can do it. Yes. And you're also having this experience of relaxing yourself. So from that like place of fight or flight or like, holy shit, I'm cold, teaching them to relax and moving to parasympathetic, feeling safe in the cold, and then movement. And it's like this experience that you have in downtown Toronto, and then all of a sudden you go back into the gray. But there's a moment before you go back into the gray where you're like enlivened and you're inspired and somebody's cheering you on. It's so cool. I'm fascinated. And when I came back just a week ago from Toronto, I'm like re-experiencing that cold from a whole different level. It's not just like get my 3 minutes in and like start my day. Now it's like, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to feel that like moment of, am I going to survive? And then be able to assign it a new meaning. It's not, it's cool. And it gets my blood, circulation going. And
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting a chest freezer at some point. And
get a big one. Because I got, like it was my first one. I got the more budget one, and it's good. It's great. But get a big one. You want to lie down in there. You want to kind of just like get comfy,
Core sleep. Awesome. So I asked you this question before, which is the last question I asked for every podcast. So let's see if something changed. Actually, to be honest, don't remember your previous answer.
I'm curious if I remember it.
Yeah. How to live a happy and fulfilling life according to Lawrence J.
I think that just to stick with the theme of today, it's the ability to take the burdens off of ourselves and learning that the burdens are usually the burdens that the parts have put upon ourselves. So by allowing for myself to live from self-energy, which we didn't get back to, but I'll speak to it now, self-energy, or different modalities or different traditions might call it different things. Like from a yoga perspective, we might call it traditions or modalities, like the essence, the spirit, the true self, the authentic self, the higher self. Self-energy is, I like using these C words, confidence, confident version of myself, stacked with the compassionate, the curious, the clear, the calm, the courageous, the connected, the creative part. So living from those characteristics stacked upon each other and making decisions from there, and noticing that if I'm not in that space, if I'm not in self space, then I'm probably not happy. I'm probably burdened. So a happy and fulfilling life is having the tools and the access to that part. And then from there, you can create all the internal abundance or material abundance. And whether you're successful or not, you're unburdening these critical judgments of, oh, I'm not successful, because this true success from this, in order to answer your question, it's like being in that space of, you called it initially empty. If all the parts go away, but it's not that all the parts go away, is they get reassigned to live within confidence, creativity, compassion, clarity, calm, being courageous, being All the other stuff. Yeah.
Amazing.
Is that a good answer?
I love it.
I was like, it's paradise. Oh, the other thing, because I said it to Anna before and to you. It's like unlimited first class flying is also happiness.
Yeah, of course. That's undeniable.
I was expecting like him to react differently. As we know, he enjoyed that answer by not giving a reaction.
I enjoy that answer. For everybody listening, if you want to travel first class, talk to your bulimic self or fat self or happy self. Subscribe, like, and enjoy. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.